My boys helped me discover the more wild and free way. We discovered how homeschooling is really living life together, and the connection piece, the relationships, it's what matters the most. And like you said, they find their own way. They have these inborn passions, and they don't even discover them all until they're getting older. Some when they're young, and then others as they get older. So just being along for the journey and staying in relationship with them. And it's such an honor and joy to watch that unfold.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host, Jim Mason.
Hi, I'm Jim Mason, President of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and this is another edition of Homeschool Talks, where I get to talk to interesting people doing interesting things in the homeschooling community. And today my guest is Ainsley Arment, who is an author and speaker and founder. She's the author of The Call of the Wild and Free and the Wild and Free Family, and she's the founder of the Wild and Free Community, which is for mothers who want to bring joy and wonder into their children's lives. Welcome, Ainsley.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So should we start with who are you, or should we start with what you do?
Whatever you want. I can just share a little about me and my family if you want.
Let's do that.
Well, I am married to my husband, Ben, for the past 23 years. We just celebrated our 23rd wedding anniversary. We have 5 children. They range in ages from 19 all the way down to 7. Wyatt, Dylan, Cody, Annie, and Millie, all named after Western cowboy and cowgirl heroes. And we have been homeschooling for about 13 out of those 19 years. So homeschooling was not something that was on my radar when my kids were little. I didn't grow up homeschooled. I didn't really know anyone who was homeschooled either. So it was all new to me when I jumped in. And it was really when my oldest child, Wyatt, was in school. We had sent him to pre-K and then kindergarten, and he was in public school in the first grade, that I started feeling really just like a stirring inside of my heart, a pull towards home and bringing him home. The word homeschool started floating around in my head, and I thought, what is this? What is this thought that I'm having? That wasn't something that I had planned to do. So I just started researching and learning more about homeschooling, and finding lots of resources online, finding the HSLDA, just learning more about how you can do this. It's possible to do this. And the real thing for me wasn't the how, it was the why. So that's sort of what just kept marinating inside of me. And as my son was in school throughout the year, little things just started happening where he just started redirecting more towards his peers above his family. And we had a great family life and connection and all of that. But there was just something lost in the connection with him being gone for 8 hours a day, and the whole rigor of getting him to the bus stop and catching the bus and coming home and doing homework and getting dinner in just before we had to maybe slip in a soccer practice before going to sleep and starting the whole thing over the next day. So this stirring inside of me was really a pull towards time, a pull towards childhood, and a pull towards a family. So I think that's what really started it. And from an educational standpoint, my son, who had always been so curious, he's only 6 years old at the time, just started going through the motions. I watched him doing the same thing. What our lifestyle represented, I saw happening in his desire to learn and his excitement over all the things that used to light him up when we would find little critters at the beach, or we would be in the woods and he'd be in awe. The light just went out in his eyes, is how I describe it. And when I realized that, I knew that I had to bring him home. So started floating the idea by my husband, and he was like, nope, this is crazy. We're not doing this. And he comes from a background of his parents were both educators, and he had not grown up around homeschooling either. So then he had to go through his own process of learning and relearning. And when we were both on the same page, it came down to, let's try it for a year and see how it goes. If it's horrible and we fail, then we'll just put him back in school and pretend like the whole thing never happened. But here we are 13 years later, and my oldest is now graduated and heading off to college this fall.
So you sound like a lot of people who started homeschooling with the same idea, including me. My wife had a more clear idea about what she wanted to do with homeschooling before we even got married. And I kind of had to get dragged along and sort of started with that, well, let's give it a shot and, see how it goes. And we ended up homeschooling 7 kids all the way through. I say all the way through. We ended up, most of our kids spent a fair amount of time in community college, kind of their last year or two of what would be high school. They kind of got a head start on college. But other than that, it was pretty much all homeschool. And then homeschooling's been changing. So our youngest is 20, and so she's only recently finished homeschooling. But from the beginning with our oldest to the end with our youngest, homeschooling changed a bunch. And groups like yours started coming along. So how did you get into kind of the book writing and organization founding? What was your driving force behind that?
Yeah, well, I am not an organization founder by nature, so that isn't something that I had kind of set out to do, but I do enjoy writing. I love writing. I was an English major in college and have just always blogged before children and then after children. And that's sort of how I got into just creating community in this new world of online and social media and all of that. So as I was homeschooling my children in the early years, I have 3 boys and then 2 girls. So it's like a whole generation, it feels like, of just the boys, and then a whole new season of also having the girls. But when it was just me and my boys, Instagram was fairly new. So I kind of made the jump from blogging to Instagram and just was sharing some of the adventures that I was having with my kids, kind of what our days look like, as everyone did back then on Instagram. Just here's what we did today. So I was sharing our days, whether it was writing in our morning journals or studying geography or poetry or being out on a nature hike or taking our nature journals outdoors. Some days we would just spend the entire day outside. I had young boys that needed a lot of energy to burn off, and I saw how much they were learning and growing just being outside. So we spent a lot of days outside, and people started reaching out and asking questions. So I thought you were homeschooling. What are you doing all day? And when do you have time to do school if you're outside, or just reading books? And in those days, the answer was simple. It was, this is homeschooling for us. This is what we consider school and learning. And it isn't that I didn't set out to do all the things. Like any new homeschooling mom or a dad, I researched all the curriculum. I looked it all up. I bought the biggest curriculum you could possibly buy. I wanted him to know everything. Okay. I wanted my oldest to know all the things and for him to get the best possible education. But what I quickly discovered is that a lot of that stuff can take place in a very short amount of time. And so each day. And so orienting our days around our values made more sense because the other things could kind of come along the way, and we could slip those in and get in a math lesson here, get in a history lesson here, all the while giving them what they needed, which was a lot of time to explore and be curious and discover and play and be outside and learn at their own pace. And so as people started asking questions and I began sharing more, I was a little bit timid to share because I didn't want anybody judging me or making assumptions that I wasn't actually teaching my children or keeping them up with their maths and things like that. But as I did, I saw a lot of people interested, and asking more questions, or other people saying that's how we homeschool too, or older homeschoolers that had already been homeschooling for many, many years said that's how we did it. And our kids turned out great. So good for you. Keep going. So I just saw this community emerging of what we now call wild and free homeschoolers, which for us, I think the wild and free is a nod to the infamous quote by Henry David Thoreau of all good things are wild and free. Wild, having the side of being in nature and having kids in their natural environment, and the freedom that kids need to preserve their wonder, the freedom to play, the freedom to grow, the freedom to develop at their own pace, even if it's slightly different than their sibling or their peers. And so that's sort of where Wild and Free Homeschooling came from. For me, it was not just doing school at home. My son had been in school for 4 years. He had sat at the desks. He had done the classroom. He had waited in the lines and listened to the teacher. And for us, it was being together as a family. It wasn't just bringing school and creating a classroom in our home, but really being free to learn and making the world our classroom.
So you say Marshall Wyatt, is he off in college? Is that what you said?
He's headed off in August. Yeah.
How did it work out with his philosophy in his college prep and admissions?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. As a new homeschooler that didn't have the experience of being homeschooled, even though I was really confident about the importance of giving our kids a childhood, that childhood isn't just meant to treat them like little adults, giving them all the adult responsibilities so that they're prepared for adulthood. I was under the conviction, and thankfully, through reading a lot of research and books by child psychologists and development and educators, I wasn't alone in the idea that childhood is meant to be a time where kids can be kids, and that in and of itself is a preparation for adulthood. So in doing that, I was really passionate about that, but every step was a new learning experience for me and for my husband and for my son Wyatt. So every year we kind of reevaluated it. We looked at what we were doing. We looked at what maybe we wanted him to learn based on what is age appropriate. And then we put that in one column, and then we had a column of all the experiences we wanted him to have that year. And sometimes it was very short list. It could just be, I want him to love books. So what kind of experiences can we create around loving books rather than just telling him to read books? And we kind of just merged those two things together. And as he got older, he had a lot more opinions about things that he liked, what he didn't like. We invited him into the conversation. What would you like to learn this year? Is there one thing that you're just super excited or passionate about that you'd like to see come into the curriculum for this year? Because we can kind of create our own curriculum as we're also getting some of those core subjects ticked off. So each year was new. And in high school, I wasn't sure. We just kind of continued on the same journey. And there were times where he was a little bit resistant to some of the things that maybe were what other kids his age would be taking. And we had to look at that and say, this is important for this reason, or this is important to us for this reason. And he would lay out his philosophy of why it's not important or is important. And we had a little bit of conversation about certain topics. There was a couple times where he chose not to take core subjects that maybe would be required in schools. And I had a little moment of panic. I thought, how are we gonna, I want to give him this freedom, but I also want to make sure that he has every opportunity presented, that he doesn't look back and then say, oh, I wish I would have done that 2 years ago or 3 years ago to prepare for college. And so we talked about that. We talked about what the possible repercussions would be if he didn't take, for example, trying to think of an example. One year he didn't want to take chemistry. We were going to do a chemistry course and he just didn't see the importance of it. or doing a higher level math of some sort. And we just discussed it. These are options that, these are certain colleges are looking for if college is what you want to do. And at the end of the day, he made some compromises, we made some compromises, but we both were on the same page. And I will say that with all the things that he is passionate about, with all the other courses that he was taking out of curiosity, he had more than enough credits, even if he was, missing one or two of those kind of required classes. And we said, let's go for it. We're going to put this all together in your portfolio for colleges. It'll be up to the colleges to decide what they think about it. And he was the one that made the choice to pursue studying for the SATs and taking SATs. Most colleges have gone test optional at this point. However, we've discovered through the homeschool application process that most colleges want to see SAT scores from homeschoolers, because even though they've made that jump, they still aren't as familiar with the homeschooling, and they still kind of do need a reference point that is a little bit more traditional. So we learned a lot through that process. He got accepted to several colleges and universities through it. We got some feedback that they absolutely loved reading about his diverse learning experience, not doing traditional grading. I wrote a document kind of as the guidance counselor for his applications and shared what we believed about how we, kind of scored how well he was doing in each course and why he chose it. So it was a real interesting process, but we kind of merged a little bit of what was expected, but more so we stayed the course with the Wild and Free Homeschooling. And that was mostly due to his choice. He really wanted to keep on being able to have the time to pursue his passions, which for him is writing. He loves to write novels. He wrote his first novel at 14 and has written several more since. So
nice. So you went from blogging to Instagramming to what next?
As Wild and Free, I guess, became more well-known, the philosophy, it was an Instagram account. We started hosting events to get people together, just to share the kind of inspiration, not trying to create a certain way of homeschooling, but more just trying to inspire homeschoolers and parents to raise children with a sense of curiosity without killing that sense of wonder that children are born with. And how do we do that? So it was really more just to create community and ways to encourage other parents who desired to do this too. We started creating events, and it grew really quickly. I think I didn't really expect it to take off in any big way, but it did. And so I felt more compelled to kind of create more resources for people to understand what it was all about. Lots of questions about what is Wild and Free? What is Wild and Free homeschooling? And what does that look like? So I really felt pulled to write the book, The Call of the Wild and Free, which kind of lays out the Wild and Free philosophy and the different methods of homeschooling. So it covers everything from, if you're just new to homeschooling and kind of need a general overview, and then shares a little bit about the Wild and Free values. So that was kind of the next step, was getting into writing books, and the Wild and Free family came after that one, and focuses a little bit more on the broader creating a family culture and what that looks like as a kind of a starting point for families even before homeschooling.
Well, tell us about the events that you host.
We have conferences, and they are, like I said, meant to be inspiration. We bring moms together. They're 4 women, not because moms are the only ones homeschooling or a part of that, but just as a mom wanting to connect and share my heart with other moms. So they started out really small. We just hosted our first one here in Virginia. I think it was 8 years ago now, and it was about 115 people. We hosted it at the Founders Inn, and I wasn't sure if I would ever do another one. And I thought, well, that was fun. That was great. Nice to get together with other moms. And it was about a year later that we decided to host another one. And the second time we announced the conference, we sold out in one day. It was only 150 people. But we thought, oh, there's a little bit more interest there. And they were a lot of fun and so encouraging and inspiring to hear from all the different Wild and Free moms and homeschoolers. So we just started creating more events, and we do about 1 or 2 conferences a year. We try to do 2, and they've been really great. We host retreats as well, some smaller retreats. We have a nonprofit that has a little retreat center in the mountains of Virginia, the Allegheny Mountains. And so we've been able to host retreats there the past several years for moms, and then also family camps. So we can bring families out for the weekend for camping, for being in nature, and they've just been really fun too.
So you went from a little over 100 at your first event. How many people come to your events now?
We have we usually find a venue that caps at around 1,000 people. So we did do one that was about twice as large in Texas several years ago, hosted it at an arena, and really discovered that I think our sweet spot is that 1,000 person event. It feels really intimate and yet also exciting at the same time.
So why would a mom out there, a homeschool mom, want to come to one of your events?
I think that we have a really incredible time together. It's a lot of fun. There's great music. There's great speakers. But the biggest thing that I think is a selling point for me and the other moms that I talk with is the sense of community, the sense of kindred spirits in the room, of others that are on the same journey. There's just a special connection that happens at these events. And, my message is really, I want moms to know that they're not alone. I want moms to know that if they desire to create a family culture that goes against culture and society, that they're not alone, that they're doing an incredible work. I want moms to feel encouraged on the days when they are tired and weary and they don't feel like their efforts are that they matter. I want to remind moms that they do, that everything matters, and that they are creating an incredible legacy with the work that they're doing day to day, the small things that they're doing.
So a lot of our listeners probably choose to homeschool their children because of their Christian faith. How does your Wild and Free philosophy kind of merge with that, or coincide with that, or consistent with that, or I'm not sure what the right word is.
That's a great question. Wild and Free is not a Christian organization solely. I myself am a Christian and a believer, and my heart is to show love to all people. So our events are open, and we have many speakers that are, Christians, and they share their faith in their messages. So we kind of have a very open way of just saying all are welcome. Whether or not everyone wants to come and be a part of it, you will hear the presenters share their hearts for homeschooling. We try to keep the focus on homeschooling, but we also want each of the presenters to feel like they can share from their hearts, and that includes their faith. And so they do. And yet we also want it to be a safe and welcoming place to all people. We want to really encourage and inspire moms from all different backgrounds and walks of life. What
words of encouragement do you have for moms today who are considering homeschooling but maybe haven't started yet? My first encouragement would be to really think about
the kind of family culture that you want to have and create with your family. And because I really believe that homeschooling is an outflow of that. And we all have a family culture, whether we created it intentionally or not. It consists of our values and our vision, everything from the big things that we believe, like our faith, politics, whatever that is, all the big things, right down to the little things of whether or not we like to play games after dinner, or whether or not we like to go on adventures, or what our interests are, or if we're a sports family. In our family dinners are really important. So we always eat together for dinner. The rest of the day, kids are making meals on their own. They're doing their own thing. But for dinner, we all sit down together and catch up. We've done a family pizza movie night on Friday nights for years and years and years. And it's a sacred time. It's silly because it's just pizza and a movie that nobody can agree on any given night. And yet we do it every single week. And kids, if friends ask to hang out, we don't do that on Friday nights. We are all together. Our family loves to go to Colorado in the summer, so it's kind of a pilgrimage that we take every year. But every family has their thing that they love to do. And, some of those things creep into our family culture. And I think we don't realize it until we're really unhappy or dissatisfied with how it feels in our house, whether or not our kids are, bickering all the time or all over the place or coming and going, or we're running around in the car. We're spending all our time dropping off, carpooling, things like that for sports. Or we realize, okay, what are the things that are really important to us? What kind of family culture do we want? Do we want the hurry? Do we want the slow? Nope, we love this, but we don't like this. And it gives you a time to readjust. And so, I know when my family was very young, I didn't think about that. It was just every little thing, it's like, this is what we do after dinner because it was easy or convenient, or, iPads came out and we got an iPad, and then we were like, oh, wait, we don't actually want our little boy on an iPad. So we had to reevaluate that. So I think there's a lot that we're learning as we go, but there are all these little points, all these little pinpoints that we feel. And it's like, oh, that's a little ping to readjust. But I would encourage moms to think about creating a family culture, talking with their spouse and getting on the same page about what their desires are, what they envision. And homeschooling will be an outgrowth of that. Do you really value the outdoors? Do you really like to read books together? I was really drawn to I could just read books all day with my kids, all day long. That would be the ideal day, would just be to read. But I saw that my boys were little, they needed to be outdoors, and it brought them to life. It calmed them down all at the same time. It energized their minds, but it calmed their bodies. It allowed for us to come inside and read together, and also so many opportunities for learning. So when you live your values, your family culture becomes really obvious, and then you can kind of help just piece it together and help it fall into place.
How does your wild and free approach to homeschooling translate into urban areas?
I think it does really well. We have a lot of writers for our monthly resources that live in urban areas, and they'll write about that, getting out in nature when you live in the city, or what that looks like if you live in an apartment. And I think that a lot of people think they have to have the perfect environment in order to homeschool. They need to have, some people think they have to have a separate room just for all their homeschooling supplies and a big table or a desk. And other people think they have to have a really big backyard, or they have to live on a farm. And it's easy for me to fall prey to that. There was a time where I was like, I'm really failing my kids because I need to have chickens in the backyard. Such a good learning experience when I see these other families with chickens.
In the old days, it was you had to have a goat.
Yes. And I went through the goat phase too. So, but I live in a neighborhood with not a very big backyard. And so I think it's easy to fall into that trap. And which is why we like to show families that are doing it in all different environments through our monthly resources with the different writers. We have moms that live in apartments in New York City. We have moms that live in LA. We have We have the moms that live on the farm, and then we have the moms that just like me live in a neighborhood. So it's really not about the environment, but about your intentions. And there is a book called For the Children's Sake, written by Susan Schaefer Macaulay, Francis Schaefer's daughter. And she says in that book that, I'm paraphrasing, but no matter where you live, you can give your kids time in nature. You know, if you live in the city, maybe you can go out to the country once a week. Maybe it's once a month. Maybe you can just take a walk to the park every day, go out on the balcony, grow something in a pot. So there's all these, there's all these ways that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. A little bit goes a long way. And if you can't give them everything, she says, give them something. And I love that philosophy.
So you mentioned that there are other writers and resources. I have been getting your email for quite a few years. You have a website. Where do people find you?
I guess if you're looking for the monthly resources, our website is the best place. All of our events, everything is really on the website. So bewildandfree.org. You can find all of information all about our monthly resources. We call them content bundles. They include digital resources and a print magazine that comes in the mail. You can sign up for free emails that includes just encouragement and also information about upcoming events and conferences and any other things that we put out, courses, activity books, things like that.
So you're still homeschooling 4 children, yes?
Yes.
And your youngest 2 are daughters. What have you learned in your many years of homeschooling now that your boys had to suffer through, but your daughters are benefiting from?
Yeah, that's a great question because it is definitely true that my boys had to suffer through a lot. They have even said, hey, that's not fair. How come the girls get this and we didn't get that? Or how come they don't have to do that and we did that? So I think the benefit to have coming first is that they had a younger mom who had a lot more energy and a lot more creative energy as well. I was all about a lot of things that I have recently thought, I need to tap back into that new homeschooling creative energy for my girls because I'm starting a whole new season with them of going through their elementary and middle school and high school years. But I think the thing that the boys did have to suffer through was that confidence and just the confidence that it's going to be okay, the confidence that that they are growing just as much as I am, and I am growing just as much as they are, and that I can rest on a lot of those days, and that when things aren't going well and we're butting heads or things aren't going well, that I need to pull back and I need to focus just on the relationship, just on the connection with my child, because it just goes so far. And continuing to push in on anything doesn't really get you anywhere. So they learn that on their own. They learn how to really discipline themselves and apply themselves when they're inspired and their curiosity takes over. So I think there's a time to teach the diligence and the follow through. And if the relationship is getting in the way of that, pulling back and focusing on the relationships. I think that has been probably the biggest lesson I've learned and have been able to apply with the girls.
It's a great lesson. I mean, I think I learned that lesson too the hard way, that at the end of the day, it's kind of all about the relationships anyway. Kids have a way of growing up and finding their own way, whether we help them along the way, but it's a lot easier to keep a good relationship than it is to kind of restore a bad relationship. And, it's an important lesson. And in my family, that's maybe the biggest single lesson of homeschooling, and it sounds to me like, you chose kind of a family culture lifestyle, and homeschooling is an outgrowth of that. And a lot of people choose kind of homeschooling as an educational model And, the way I started was, okay, if we're going to homeschool, we got to have a little school in our home. The kids got to get up, and we have to have math at 8 and reading at 9. And we got away from that pretty quickly. But the benefit to my family has been, all of our children and all of our children with each of us are in an ongoing, healthy sort of relationship. Not that we don't have problems, but, and at some point, we just decided the relationship's more important than everything else.
Yeah, exactly. It's so good. And it's inspiring to hear you say that. That's exactly how it was for us. And even though my boys helped me discover the more wild and free way, I was the same thing. I was the same way. I wanted to have a little bit more, we're going to do reading at 8. We're going to do, history at 10. We're going to have a break here. This is what we're going to do. And it just, it quickly moved away from that as we discovered how homeschooling is really living life together and figuring that piece out as well. But the connection piece, the relationships, it's what matters the most. And like you said, they find their own way. They have these inborn passions, and they don't even discover them all until they're getting older. Some when they're young, and then others as they get older. So just being along for the journey and staying in relationship with them. And it's such an honor and joy to watch that unfold.
Well, Ainsley, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I'll give you the final word. Anything you'd like to say, and say your website one more time.
Great. Yes, it's bewildandfree.org. And you can find out everything from conferences and courses to Farm Village events and things like that. But such a joy to be here. Thanks for sharing in the message of saving childhood and wonder and relationship through homeschooling. Appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, I really have enjoyed getting your emails and kind of learning a little bit more about you today. And for those of you out there, today my guest is Ainsley Arment, and she's a homeschool mom. And she went from blogging to Instagramming to founding a great organization called the Wild and Free Community. And she's given you her website. Be sure to visit that. We'll put it in our show notes as well. And I'm Jim Mason, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, where our mission is to make homeschooling possible for as many people who want to do it. And you can find out more about us at our website at hslda.org, where you can become a member to help us carry out our mission, or donate to help homeschoolers in need as well. So once again, thank you, Ainsley.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's team of educational consultants. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the number of curriculum options to choose from? Or maybe you're frustrated because your child is struggling and you're not sure what to do next. Our educational consultants can help. As an HSLDA member, you have access to customized, practical guidance on everything from lesson planning and record keeping to helping a child with learning difficulties. If you want to experience less frustration and more progress in your homeschool, get support from our educational consultants by becoming a member of HSLDA. Learn more at hslda.org/join. That's hslda.org/join. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.